And so I draw in a breath within me, and I recognize that it is the inspiration of spirit, the source, the one life that is living me, creating from itself all there is, the seen and the unseen, and that all that it is being expressed through me, as me, like a stained glass window. Different aspects, different qualities of spirit are showing up. And I know that all those qualities of spirit, this life, the love, the joy, the peace, the good, the safety, the support, the abundance, is all right where I am, for it is the presence within me, around me, everywhere. And because it is my birthright, I know that it is all the birthright of all there is, all people. And I'm so grateful for this. Grateful to know that that life is living me. And that I have the ability and the opportunity to see it in all people, in all things, in its beauty and its splendor, as its light is shining through them, through me, into the world. I'm so grateful knowing this blessing of life is here, now. Wherever I am, it is with me. I'm so grateful for this day, for this truth of spirit, for this life that continues to love throughout eternity, creating itself, creating me and all there is. And so I release this with great gratitude, knowing all is well, all is good, and all is love, knowing that Spirit is creating it right now and forevermore. And I simply claim this in love, and so it is.
So we're celebrating this month Advent, and I love Advent. I'm not into the Jesus thing, but I love Advent as the preparation for light within us. And I think I'm going to do a slight side trip here, because as I mentioned, today is also Bodhi Day, and so I brought one of my many Buddhas along with it. And yesterday we had a meditation retreat here yesterday, and so 7 of you participated in that, 8 of us, including me. And at one point we were focused. I gave the invitation to focus on something during the retreat. And so I was sitting there focusing on the back of Buddha, because I had the Buddha on the altar right up here facing out for everybody else, and I'm focusing on the back of Buddha, and I was particularly focusing on the light over the head of the Buddha, which is the symbol for enlightenment in the Buddhist tradition of the light coming down into the Buddha. And I was thinking that in the Acts of the Apostles, when the Pentecost happened, it said the Spirit came like a flame down over their heads also. And part of my meditation was that this flame, this enlightenment, lives above all of our heads. We are all lifted in that light. We all have the potential if we will let it in. And the only difference between an enlightened master and anybody who's not an enlightened master, which is me and everybody else, pretty much, is that we haven't fully let it in. And I thought with the talk of Hearts Ablaze, that's a place also is, it goes from the head down through to the heart and opens up our heart. So I invite you today to look around at everybody else, realize we all have a little flame over our head of enlightenment, and recognize that you do too. and let it in. Let it in a little bit more. So out of that, the Advent season is preparing for the birth of the light, the Christ consciousness. Ernest Holmes describes the Christ consciousness not as isolated in one person, one time, but as something that each one of us has. Each is the ever-presence of the alignment and the knowing of ourselves as the infinite presence. And so we are all have the Christ consciousness available. As Meister Eckhart said, I don't remember the quote exactly, but it was something to the effect of, we are all that. This only begotten Son is us. It's always being begotten. It's always being born within us. And so we are all of that. So we prepare ourselves in consciousness. That's the purpose of Advent, is to look at what does it take to prepare? What does it take to open up? What does it take to let that in? So the first Sunday, last Sunday, we opened up and we talked about the idea of hope. And the idea of hope is just simply opening the door. Opening the door and saying, yes, I'm willing to get off my pity party of despair. Not you guys, but you know people who are on pity parties of despair, and right? Yeah. And none of us have ever been there, but you've known people. And so we're willing to get off of that. And as those of you who are receiving the daily Advent messages that I'm sending out, and you can sign up for that anytime you want to, know that I switched that also to faith, which is standing in the absolute certainty of my opening to that and the opening to that. Today we begin to look at the next step, which is peace. Recognizing the peace that always is present, that always lives within us, whether we remember it, whether we forget it, it's always present. And so as we stand in that faith, we begin to move into a peace, I trust that the process is going to unfold as it needs to. And I trust that, thank God, I'm not the only one in charge of it. I get to influence it, I get to play with it, but there's something greater happening here. And so that faith, that as we open up to that Christ consciousness. So that's what we're going to play with Advent for this week. And then our theme for the talks is called Hearts Ablaze. That was what I was kind of referring to with letting our light, letting that light of Spirit open up and set our hearts on fire. Jill Bolte-Taylor, who's well known for being a neurologist who had a stroke and being able to actually observe herself having the stroke and wrote about it, in her second book called Whole Brain Living said, we humans are feeling creatures who think rather than thinking creatures who feel. We humans are feeling creatures who think. So often, especially in our Western culture, we're conditioned to approach life by leading with our intellect, by leading with our thinking. I love the phrase in the 12-step program, my best thinking got me here, which is usually not in a good place. And this leading with the intellect is partly in reaction to centuries of living from myths and superstitions and all that old stuff, particularly that made no sense if we really thought them through. And we saw this particularly in religions, many religions. It's just like, no, you just do this because, it's what, your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and all that did, but don't question it. And so in what was called the Age of Enlightenment, there was starting to be some questions. There were scientific discoveries that were saying, no, we're not an Earth with a dome over it and a big guy sitting in the sky, looking down on us. We're actually a planet rotating around a sun, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like all of a sudden the whole old way of thinking, the old mythology starts to collapse. For some people it still hasn't, but for most people it has. But a culture that's based only on thinking produces a colorless, bland existence and not a fully enjoyed life. Yes? So last week we talked about standing on solid, well-thought-out principles, a foundation for life. And that's important. We have to have that. But we also need to stand with a heart ablaze with the love and the joy that is the true nature of the universe. If we don't add the color, we just have this black and white certainty, and it's frankly missing a lot. And it's not an either or, it's a both and. One without the other creates either a passionless life or a life of complete chaos. How many of you know people who live completely on their emotions? Yeah, right? Life of complete chaos. And other people who live completely in their intellect and nothing out of the ordinary happens, a life of blandness, just existence. Ernest Holmes says that feeling, organized and directed, is intelligent creation. Feeling, organized and directed, creates. In our teaching about spiritual mind treatment, our affirmative prayer process, we say that a thought plus a feeling equals a result. We need to have that feeling. Now, feeling doesn't mean big emotion, but it does mean having something open, having something going on in the feeling sense. Holmes also points out that which can be felt cannot be taught. That is, you can't be taught to feel, and the real truth is we don't need to be taught to feel because we already do feel. Again, we are feeling creatures. Feeling is our nature. It's our natural way of being. He also goes on to say, though, that which can be taught, which is taught, can be felt. We need more than just intellectual knowledge about something, yes? We need to feel it. We need to experience it. We need to know it. I oftentimes use the metaphor, do you want to know about chocolate or do you want to feel and experience chocolate? Right? Yeah, feel and experience it. There's a whole lot of other things, all of life, basically. We need to know it on a more than intellectual basis until there is emotion, passion, and conviction added. The words and the ideas are empty of any kind of an animating power. Think of last night I was at a lovely classical music concert, and they played with feeling. Now, they could have just played the notes, right? It wouldn't just, proper like that. But they played with feeling, and they were playing Haydn's string quartets, which have a lot of play in them and a lot of humor in them, if you understand that. And so it's the same way with our lives, as we can just have the words, but they're empty without some animating power. This is why music moves us, by the way. This is why we like to listen to what Brent wrote, what he wrote, and listening to that and singing that along with that starts to take that in on a different level than just the intellectual hearing me babble about it, right? Music moves us, it adds feeling to words and animates them within us. And when we do spiritual mind treatment, as I mentioned before, we need both the structure to guide us. The structure is important. But we also need the feeling to give it essence, the animating. And animating literally means giving life to. Full of life. We need that animating power behind the treatment. And without that essence, it's just a lifeless collection of words. I knew a person once who was a religious science practitioner who basically I described her treatment as not saying any wrong words. I once did a treatment in which I went, during the treatment. And afterwards she accused me of acting because she'd never felt a treatment. So what's true of treatment is true of our whole lives because our lives literally are a spiritual mind treatment. Our lives literally are a prayer. We're constantly doing that, consciously or not, right? So we're constantly speaking and feeling our lives into existence. And as we free ourselves of the ties that bind us emotionally and allow our authentic self to fully, vibrantly express as we allow our light to shine, brilliance to shine and blaze, we bring more of the fire of the divine into our lives. And the core emotion of that fire is love. The core emotion is love. That big capital L love, which is the nature of spirit. And Ernest Holmes, one of his most well-known among religious scientists quotes is, "Love is the central flame of the universe, nay, the very fire itself. Love is self-givingness through creation, the imparting of the divine through the human." You and I are the divine being human, being giving itself its own nature as you and me. As you and me. What a privilege, huh? What a wonderful thing. We get down on ourselves, don't we? Do you ever get down on yourself? I get down on myself sometimes. But think about it. Take a step back. I am the infinite presence being me, including this thing that I just messed up. What a great thing. I told the story yesterday of a story called about what's known as the Golden Buddha. And it's a story where there was a Buddha that was up in the jungles of Myanmar, I believe it was, Cambodia, somewhere in Southeast Asia there. And the person who was running the country decided they wanted to take all these abandoned Buddhas and bring them into the main city so that they could be appreciated, so they could be seen. And so they were bringing this humongous clay Buddha from out of the jungle, and as one of the workers with a crane was moving it, he slightly lost control of the crane, and the Buddha banged against something, and it chipped off a huge chunk of the Buddha. And oh my God, what a terrible thing. And then people noticed that underneath that chunk, it was gleaming. And finally, when they explored it, they found out it was actually a solid gold Buddha, and we're talking about a big Buddha. We're not talking about little things. We're talking about a big Buddha, solid gold. And what they came to realize was that centuries before, this Buddha had been in a monastery and the country was being invaded, and the monks covered it in clay so that it wouldn't be melted down and captured and melted down by the opposing armies. But unfortunately, all the monks got killed off, so nobody remembered that they had done that. And so here sat this gold Buddha under a crust of clay. How many of us are gold Buddhas sitting under a crust of clay? Can we let our light shine? And it takes a mistake, quote, an error, quote, to reveal that. So when we make mistakes, it's a process, it's an opportunity for us to say, what is the gold that's being revealed underneath this? We're all born feeling. We were all born with a sense of vibrant aliveness. Look at little children. They're all born with a sense of vibrant aliveness. But along the journey, we damp down the inner flame of our aliveness through either conditioning, playing it safe, fitting in, don't be too big, which means don't be so alive. Because if you're too alive as a child, you'll trigger off your parents' own compressed aliveness that they shouldn't feel, which came from their parents, etc., etc. Or we lose it through grief, the unhealed grief, which is induced through hurt and loss, and then triggers off the fear of opening up and being hurt again. Can anybody besides me relate to any of those? Conditioning and grief? Yeah. And so it's important to face the inner shadows, to bring the light of love into our hearts and our lives. We're not here to get through life safely. That's your neighbor. You're not here to get through life safely. You're not here to get through without anything untoward happening. Helen Keller said life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And she also said that the worst evils are apathy and the superstition of security. If everything is changing constantly, nothing is what we consider secure. And that change is always constantly showing up because there's evolution happening in the universe, always revealing something new, something greater, something that hasn't been before. The infinite is always expressing more and more and more of its own nature. And in order to do that, it can't stay stuck in one shape and one form forever. Yes? So we all change. We have to understand that life is what it is. It is beautiful, it is flowing, it is joyful. It is chaotic, it is violent, and it includes death. It's all of that. That's the nature of life. Everything in life appears for a while and then recedes back into the mystery. Breathe. So we are expressions of life evolving from unconsciousness to consciousness, to greater consciousness. It's only when we fight life as it is, trying to control it, trying to make it into our image and likeness, trying to make it into our idea of how it should be, that's when we really start to experience pain and struggle. When we can let life flow through us. Brent's song had a line about surfing through life, being able to surf that ride that wave. When we can do that, it's when we live at that level that we start to flow with life, and it's not pain, and it's not struggle. It's only when we live at the lowest level of consciousness, viewing life as something happening to us, oh my God, that big thing is happening to me, poor me, that we feel like helpless victims. Then with all that struggle and pain, we close off our hearts, trying to intellectualize our way through a controlled life, through a nice, ordered, safe life that we're trying to make. And so as we learn to flow with life, as we learn to release and let go of all the stuff that's happening, and just play. How many of you remember play? It's only when we do that, when we feel safe enough to allow our hearts to open, as we learn to flow with that river of life, we discover freedom and joy. We begin by willingness to open our hearts again. And sometimes that looks like, I'm willing to open my heart. Sometimes it looks like, well, I'm willing to be willing to open my heart. Sometimes it's like, well, I might down the road a little bit be willing to open my heart a little bit. Okay? Wherever you're at, it's fine. As long as there's some level of willingness, as long as there's some crack in the door that allows that life energy in. Our willingness to let our light shine, our aliveness shine. To let go of clinging to all of our hurts and wounds, to stop defining ourselves by our woundedness. Oh my God, do you know what I've been through? And begin to define ourselves instead by our aliveness, by our passion, by our magnificence. Nudge the person next to you and say, you are an alive piece of magnificence. Jeremy, get that guy behind you there. And you too. We let our magnificence and our aliveness and our passion shine. Then, instead of life happening to us, life starts happening through us and with us and as us. And we recognize that we are literally manifestations of love immersed in a field of infinite love. Each of us is love, a manifestation, an incarnation of love. Love in a body. Living within a field of love. Existing, playing in a field of love. We have that vision statement of ours that we live as love in a world of love. And people misunderstand that and say, well, have you looked at the world lately? It ain't a world of love. That's not the world I'm talking about. That's not the world we're thinking of. We are love, living in a universe of love. And just because not everybody's caught on to that vision yet, by the way, including us sometimes, yes, if we're honest, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And we simply our work is to simply grow into that vision. So when we realize that we're infinite beings of love, immersed in a field of infinite love, not only do we feel safe, in a different level of safe, a different kind of safety, but we even let go of seeking safety, and instead we come out and play. In the light, in the love, and the life of the infinite, we play. And then we open to and become focused on our vision instead of our apathy, instead of our fears, instead of our safety. The wonderful African-American lesbian activist Audre Lorde said, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. When I'm really living out loud, when I'm really going for what I want, what I know is the highest and best, it becomes less important whether or not I'm afraid. And she also, by the way, reminds us that your silence will not protect you. You're being silent, you're playing small, serves nobody, including ourselves. Spirit is the constant, infinite self-givingness, blazing its essence into form eternally, as you, as me, as all of life. And so as we take the time to release the old fears, the old hurts, the beliefs and superstitions that have turned us, and most of humanity, by the way, for lifetimes, and as we connect ever more deeply with the Spirit within and all around us, taking the time to do that, our hearts will be naturally ablaze with life and love. Breathe that in for a moment. At the age of 93, Charles Fillmore, who is the co-founder of the Unity Movement, said, "I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me." 93 years old. How many of you have a story that, well, I'm getting a little bit too old to really, yeah. I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me. I invite you this week to let your heart sizzle and with zeal and be ablaze with the love and life that Spirit is expressing. So this week, 2 practices. Number 1, if you know or suspect that you have blockages of fear, hurt, or grief, work with a practitioner. You heard it coming. Nudge your neighbor. I know that you and I both have blockages of fear, hurt, and grief. Work with a practitioner to free yourself. Join a grief support group. Get support to get free. You know, we rarely can do this alone. We live in this country that says, well, I got to do it all by myself. I'll just sit down and figure it out all by myself. No, you won't. As one of my teachers used to say, if God wanted us to be alone, he would have given each of us a planet. There's plenty to go around. But we all showed up on this one, and the reason is not to sit here and be alone and try and figure it out by myself. We're here in community, and community isn't just to hang out and have a nice time. Community is to love and support each other in rising higher. In rising higher. And expanding and being more alive. So that's the first one. If you suspect that you have blockages, get support. We have licensed practitioners who are trained to help you with that. Would the practitioners in the room stand up for a moment? I see at least 4 of them in the 5. Yeah. We've got 7 of them in all, so. And then the second spiritual practice this week is to spend time contemplating your heart. We know that what we contemplate grows, yes? So spend time contemplating your heart energy, that aliveness energy. Imagine it opening and expanding and becoming more inclusive of life, that capital L, life. Practice listening to and trusting your heart in life. Will you play with those 2 practices this week? Great, great. So I want to close with a quote, and it comes from a song by John Lennon. And he wrote this song to Mia Farrow's sister Prudence while they were in an ashram in India. But I'm going to change the name from Prudence to you. I'm going to change it to child within you. So, dear child within you, won't you come out to play? Greet the brand new day. The sun is up, the sky is blue, it's beautiful, and so are you. The wind is low, the birds will sing that you are part of everything. Won't you come out to play? Sing that to your inner child. Sing that to your heart. And then we have an affirmation. And join me in this affirmation. I let the fire of infinite love blaze in my heart. One more time with feeling. I let the fire of infinite love blaze in my heart. And so I do, and so it is. Yeah. Thank you.